Good afternoon. It's, what is it? It's Tuesday, the 29th of May, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Media on trial, Mike, is the only subject, really, as we're going to see.
Yes, media on trial. So here are the speakers at the event, which did take place on Sunday, I'm delighted to say. Now, before we talk about any more about it, I just want to play a few seconds of Tim Hayward's comments because this is absolutely appropriate. So just listen to this.
First of all, I'd like very much to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank Sheila for her sterling efforts in getting us somewhere, and I'd obviously like to thank very much indeed our hosts. It's very heartwarming and encouraging that although Leeds Council couldn't find a space for us, wouldn't find a space for us, this Islamic community here gave us this land to talk to you on, and I'm really very appreciative of that, as I think all of us are. They are sending a very clear message about the value of freedom of speech, the importance of it.
Okay, so that was Professor Tim Hayward, and he makes a very significant point here, Brian. I have to say that the end of last year, following the previous Media on Trial event, I offered Sheila Coombs of From Stop War a little bit of help to get this one together, and I was somewhat surprised and shocked by what this event became in terms of the organisation. So two separate venues pulling out, the second venue pulling out last Wednesday, and then on Friday, the security company, the security team pulling out, apparently because they simply stopped answering their telephones. It just was an unbelievable thing, and I have to say that the people that were running the venue provided the most spectacular support to this event, and they deserve massive applause because they are probably going to come under a little bit of pressure from Leeds City Council. They have to work with Leeds City Council on a regular basis, and I hope it doesn't turn out that way. But they certainly were prepared to stand up for free speech, and they deserved every bit of the applause they got on the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps as just a bit of a recap for people who may have joined us for the first time today, here we are, May 2018 in the United Kingdom. And if you try and set up an event to talk about free speech, an event in which you are asking key questions of the British media, why certain things are not reported, why certain things are reported inaccurately, there is, how do you describe it? There's an underground movement to make sure you can't hold that event. And if this was just malicious individuals, Mike, coming forward and saying, well, we don't want that lot holding this sort of event, you could perhaps understand it. But it isn't just individuals. This is coordinated between organisations, including local authorities. So local authorities in Britain helping to close down free speech if you dare to criticise not just the government, but mainstream media itself. Very serious.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see a little bit of the depth of that in a second. So who was speaking? Well, Professor Piers Robinson was speaking, talking about propaganda, setting the scene in general. Robert Stewart brought us up to date with the latest developments on the Saving Syria's Children issue, with a couple of bombshells right at the end. Well, when the video comes out, you will see that. Tim, you've seen a little snippet from Patrick Henningsen gave a fantastic talk, as did Peter Ford, former UK ambassador to Syria and other places, and of course Vanessa Beeley. So I've got to say thank you very much to Sheila Coombs in the centre there and the team that set that up. Unbelievable group of people, and a pleasure to work with them. So thank you very much. Now you're talking about this coordinated attack, Brian. And while all this business setting up Media on Trial was going on, there was something else happening in parallel, which Craig Murray was covering, and he's put some subsequent updates to this since this particular article was published. But I suggest you start here with the Philip Cross affair. Now, Craig Murray says that 133,612 edits to Wikipedia have been made in the name of Philip Cross over 14 years. That's over 30 edits per day, 7 days a week. And I do not use that figuratively. Wikipedia edits are timed. And if you plot them, the time card of Philip Cross's Wikipedia activity is astonishing. If it is one individual, and you can go and have a look at the plot there on the web page. He says the operation runs like clockwork, 7 days a week, every waking hour without significant variation. If Philip Cross genuinely is an individual, there's no denying that he is morbidly obsessed. I'm no psychiatrist, but in my entirely inexpert eyes, this looks like the behavior of a deranged psychotic with no regular social activities outside the home, no job, or an incredibly tolerant boss, living his life through a screen. I run, that's Craig Murray, runs what is arguably the most widely read single-person political blog in the UK, and I do not spend nearly as much time on the internet as Philip Cross. My time card would show where I watch football on Saturdays, go drinking on Fridays, go to the supermarket for a walk or out with the family on Sundays, and generally relax much more and read books in the evenings. Cross does not have the pattern of activity of a normal and properly rounded human being. There are three options here. Philip Cross is either a very strange person indeed, or is a false persona disguising a paid operation to control Wikipedia content, or is a real front person for such an operation in his name. Why does this, to take the official explanation, sad, obsessive, no friends, nutter, matter? And is the question, and he says, because the purpose of the Philip Cross operation is to systematically attack and undermine the reputation of those who are prominent in challenging the dominant corporate and state media narrative, particularly in foreign affairs. Philip Cross also systematically seeks to burnish the reputations of mainstream media journalists and other figures who are particularly prominent in pushing neocon war propaganda and in promoting the interests of Israel. And he has added an update to this particular article where he says Philip Cross has not had one single day off from editing Wikipedia in almost 5 years. He has edited every single day from the 29th of August 2013 to the 14th of May 2018, including 5 Christmas days. That's 1,721 consecutive days of editing. Right now, this issue, this problem of Philip Cross was being discussed on Twitter over the last couple of weeks. Craig Murray was involved in that discussion. Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, got involved. He ran away pretty quickly from the conversation. And then a Twitter account called Wikimedia UK got involved as well. And it said that Wikipedia, it then claimed that Craig Murray was being abusive. Of course he wasn't. And they muted Craig Murray. But in fact, Wikimedia had come into the conversation uninvited into that thread, which was discussing the Philip Cross operation, and started attacking anybody that was questioning Cross's legitimacy. And so Murray says that his view is that Philip Cross is probably a real person, but that he fronts a group acting under his name. And that group, as he points out, is attacking himself. It's attacking all the people that were involved in the Media on Trial event on Sunday. This is, as you say, an absolutely organised, concerted effort. Wikipedia doesn't want to discuss it. I can't imagine why. But this is the state that we're in at the moment. We're having to hold events underground in secret locations to prevent intimidation of the venue.
Yeah.
And we're having this type of... there was somebody at the event, Brian, who, long-standing journalist, involved in politics for 40 years, and she said during the event that she had never experienced the situation where an event giving talks like this one was having to be, the venue was having to be given at the last minute via email. It's like setting up a rave, really, which of course at that time was an illegal activity.
You could say that, Mike, but my brain goes back to Cold War days, and it goes back to East Germany This is the sorts of things people had to do if they were going to have any discussion which could be interpreted as being critical of the government, had to be done in secret. People had to be vetted before they could be invited. And we have the same situation now, which is clearly the situation in UK. This is what it is, and that hasn't arisen as an accident. This is a result of deliberate policy, which has come in across all three parties. So we have now the movement of the UK towards a Soviet-style communitarian sort of state. This is what it's about. And I'll just add that from a personal point of view, I was always fascinated how, when I started to speak out about the charity, the political charity Common Purpose, and what it was actually doing in society, and I was producing documentary evidence to support what I was saying, I also witnessed this attack on me building up over the internet, Wikipedia part of it. And you haven't got time to go back in to try and see everything that's being said and to edit it out. But I know that several years ago, I came to the conclusion that this must be part of an organised operation instead of one individual who perhaps takes a dislike to you. Well, the timing of media on trial, absolutely perfect. This morning, when I have a look at the BBC website, what do I see? But essentially press frenzy over the Skripals. So the BBC involved, but every other newspaper, and suddenly it's Skripal. So UK column pointed out they disappeared. That situation was true for about a week, I think, and then we had comment in the so-called mainstream press and media, and now that has really grown. So let's come in and see what we're looking at. A little bit of a reminder, but we've got the BBC here going back to the 12th of March. Russian spy, what are nerve agents and what do they do? So the BBC likes its graphics. So we had a nice diagram of the body with some of the symptoms: convulsions, loss of consciousness, coma, pupils constricted, shortness of breath, excessive fluid secretion, profuse sweating, and then it says death can occur by asphyxiation or cardiac arrest. So the BBC, very big on Russian administered nerve agent Novichok. This is immensely dangerous stuff. It can kill you. And these were some of the additional comments. White eyes, pupils constricted, convulsions, drooling, in the worst cases coma, respiratory failure and death. So we're not messing around here. This is extremely nasty stuff, and it's designed to kill in minute quantities because we're told it was pure military grade nerve agent Novichok. Well, the article also said this: if you've ever sprayed insect repellent at a fly, you might have seen it drop to the ground and lie on its back, legs twitching. This is the result of nerve agents taking hold. And pretty gross analogy, but of course, human beings will suffer exactly the same effects. These products were not made to simply incapacitate you and cause a few problems. They were designed to kill, and kill very, very quickly. That's why they're military grade. But as we see this story unfold, it gets more and more bizarre. In the same article, it says, is there a risk to the public? Professor Dame Sally Davis, the Chief Medical Officer of England, said the risk of harm in the Salisbury case was low. However, up to 500 people who went to the Mill Pub and Zizi restaurant, Salisbury city centre, have been told to, quote, wash their clothes and wipe possessions. So the public health guidance to a nerve agent unleashed in a British city is there's not a problem, Mike, not a problem. Wash your clothes and wash your hands. Meanwhile, public officials that have to go into the city and deal with so-called contamination sites are dressed up like the Muppets in full protective clothing and respirators.
But only some of them?
Only some of them, of course. And as we've pointed out, none of the decontamination teams seem to go through any decontamination processes themselves. Well, let's have a look at what the BBC is talking about today. Here's the headline: Russian spy poisoning, how the Skripals were saved. The first thing we have to point out is some problems with the BBC because Mark Urban, who's produced this article, has got embedded video by the BBC talking about a Dr. Stephen Jukes with a D. However, other BBC video now renames him to Stephen Jukes with a J. And I was intrigued to see that newspapers are reporting him as Stephen Jukes. So the BBC doesn't seem to be able to get basic names right.
Didn't we have an article some time ago saying that if this type of mistake was made, it was likely to be evidence of the website being a fake news website?
That's exactly what the BBC said, Mike. But of course, the BBC would probably say, well, we're allowed to make mistakes because we're the BBC and you can trust us.
Yes.
But I don't know whether we can trust the BBC on this one. So let's follow it through. Dr. Stephen Jukes, he said, we were dealing with the unknown. We were expecting them, the Skripals, not to survive. To which I think we can put in a question. How do we explain this miraculous recovery from alleged pure-grade military nerve agent Novichok? Because you're not supposed to survive from this stuff. So we'd like to know more details about how, when they were expected not to survive, they suddenly survived. But on it goes. He says, I believe that this situation was the first of its kind. I think we were all exceptionally surprised, pleasantly surprised to see the recovery happen, and at, quote, such a pace when it did begin to happen that I can't easily explain it. So that doctor, obviously very surprised at the speed at which these two got better. So let's ram the point home. Are we really to believe that the Skripals were badly poisoned with pure military-grade nerve agent, Novichok? Sorry, that should be Novichok. They were unconscious for a minimum of 2 weeks because the dialogue as to how long they were unconscious is not clear, and they needed full life support, and yet they recover at a pace this doctor can't explain. I'm allowed some spelling mistakes here, Mike, in this one, because of course the BBC can do it on a budget of 3.74 billion, of course. So Lorna Wilkinson here, she said, when policeman Nick Bailey was admitted with similar symptoms, there was real concern as to how big this could get. Have we just gone from having 2 index patients having something that actually could become all-consuming and involve many casualties? Because we really didn't know at that point. So why did the British government not call an emergency at this particular point and close down Salisbury? The first thing in any form of attack of this nature is you're going to try and contain it before you can deal with it. You've got to contain it. But the British government didn't call an emergency and start to contain the area at all. It was all done piecemeal. But this lady very early on says that there was grave concerns that we could involve many casualties. So BBC simply not asking these questions. Their video goes on and they interview the senior sister who was one of the staff who was involved very early on. She says that Yulia and Sergei were admitted. We were led to believe they'd taken an overdose, so there was no mention of nerve agent poison. They were needing support with their breathing, with their cardiovascular system.
I was just going to say that is an interesting statement because we did find a report in a medical journal, a medical news website, an official medical news website, that what the hospital had said was that there had been a major incident involving fentanyl, which of course is an opiate, a sort of artificial version of heroin. So this seems to tie in with that report because she's suggesting they initially thought it was an overdose.
It was an overdose, yeah. Well, of course, the thing that goes with it, if they thought it was an overdose, what they clearly weren't doing was protecting themselves against a nerve agent. So how many members of staff came into contact with these patients? What happened to bodily fluids? There's all sorts of questions, BBC not going near. But this is a little bit of sarcasm, but it's based on truth. We're saying, so did the NHS use baby wipes to help treat the severe nerve agent poisoning as recommended by Public Health England? And if you think that we are using pure humour here. We're not, because this is the Public Health England report, and in it they said, well, to the public, if you're worried, you should use baby wipes.
Yes.
So there's something absolutely not right, and the BBC is not going near it. The BBC, of course, was very big on the dangers, and so in this particular article they're saying that the nerve agent does not evaporate or disappear over time, and intense cleaning with caustic chemicals is required to get rid of it. So that's what the BBC said at the time. Let's come back to Dame Sally Claire Davies, the Chief Medical Officer. She said the risk to the public from the nerve agent is low. There could be a risk from prolonged long-term exposure to the skin. Wash your clothes in a washing machine with a regular detergent. But the thing about a nerve agent, Mike, and the military all trained in this, is that you get it on your skin, you're in trouble. That's now, that's not in 2 months' time. So the BBC has been part of the misleading media around this whole case. I've said at the top, why is there confusion? Because the story itself is a lie, seems to be the best interest on this. So where do we go? Back into the BBC video. I did have concerns because obviously when they first came in, there was no indication of the fact it was a nerve agent, and therefore we took our normal protection when any patient comes in, and would therefore not at that point have taken any extra precautions in terms of protecting ourselves. So we're to believe that a policeman touches these individuals, touches their clothes, touches them, gets bodily fluids on him, he's cross-contaminated, and yet when these 3 individuals come into the NHS, although the NHS are not protecting themselves against nerve agents, nobody gets cross-contaminated. How does this happen? Back to the pictures of the fact that to be safe, apparently you need to be dressed in these suits. And we'll just put the question in again. If the NHS staff were protected by their normal uniforms, paper masks, having a bad day with the typos, and gloves, that should be, why was it necessary for teams in Salisbury to use full personal protection, including respirators? So we can keep asking this question, and we're not getting the answers. So here's Dr. Stephen Dukes, the expert advice that we had from outside the hospital. It was very clear that the clinical decision were ours, but we would be foolish not to take their advice, which we did, and that helped. So I think we have to ask here, what was the advice that achieved an unexplained speedy recovery, and who provided that advice? We're not told. We've then got a little bit of emotive stuff here, I think, from this doctor. He says that he first knew about the fact that it was a so-called spy case at 6 o'clock in the morning on the Monday, so that effectively the next day. He said to camera, anyone who is critically ill who wakes up in a hospital with 2 weeks of their life or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of their life missing with no family or friends support, that's a very vulnerable place to find yourself in. We asked, what's the point of this statement? Was it to help create public empathy and sympathy for the Skripals? I think it was, and that would help firm the government line in people's minds. So I'm not sure what the BBC is up to. They have some comment from this lady, Dr. Christine Blanchard, the medical director. They say to her, is it fair to say that people who have been exposed to that kind of poisoning will be in need of long-term assistance medically? She says, I think the honest answer is we don't know. We have a total world experience of treating 3 people with Novichok poisoning. I think it's safe to say that we're still learning. But they've already demonstrated that they've been able to achieve a miraculous recovery with their treatment. So they must know something about it. I just do not understand this, Mike. It doesn't add up. And if we just finish off, this was the Mail reporting. Doctors say the future uncertain. So they make a miraculous speedy recovery, but we don't know what the prognosis is. No evidence has yet been provided that the agent was Novichok. We're talking about Novichok, but no evidence has yet been provided, and no evidence has been provided that the Russians were behind the attack. So it just goes on with this media spin, half-truths, conjecture, inconsistencies, lies. What took place, we don't know, but I think what we can say is that if the solution is soap and water and baby wipes, this was not a chemical, a weapons-grade nerve agent. And who would produce the story? Well, here's Mark Urban, and of course he posted early this morning, have a look at my article and the video, and I thought it was appropriate just to get onto his Twitter page and say, I don't quite understand what you're doing here because your story is full of holes. And several other people had already posted replies back to him. And can I encourage our audience, if you're beginning to think what took place, I don't understand the BBC reporting, don't just sit and sort of mull it over. Get onto that Twitter page and start to ask the journalist himself why he has said what he said and ask him to explain some of the questions.
Well, on Friday, Defence Minister Lord Freddy Howe was speaking to the 21st Annual Chemical Weapons Demilitarisation Conference in London. He commended the vital work, according to the press release, of scientific and technical experts to make the world safe from chemical weapons, while acknowledging the shocking events of the past year, including the chemical weapons attack in Salisbury and the continuing use of chemical weapons in Syria. He says, in an increasingly dangerous world, we cannot allow these abhorrent weapons to spread once more across the globe. We're working with international partners across the world to agree how to best deal with the use of chemical weapons and to ensure that those who use chemical weapons are held to account, however long that takes. So they're saying that the destruction of chemical weapons is a high priority under the 1997 Chemical Weapons Convention. And so the conference provided an opportunity for experts from all over the world to discuss progress and cooperation in eliminating chemical weapons and the technical challenges that remain. So that's fantastic. But it doesn't end there because just a few days prior to that, it was announced this is still at the 21st Annual Chemical Weapons Demilitarisation Conference in London. The Ministry of Defence and the US Department of Defence have jointly launched a competition to seek innovative technical solutions to the safe destruction of caches of munitions found on the battlefield, including chemical and biological munitions. So that's good. That competition is running at the moment. And what's this part of? Well, it's part of the Defence and Security Accelerator, which a few days prior to that conference, they had announced an open call for innovation. The open call is looking for innovative ideas on how the MOD can improve the defence and security of the UK. Ideas could be a concept, a product, a service, at various levels of maturity is how they describe it. And in terms of defence requirements, well, we've just mentioned the chemical and biological defence requirements, but they're saying that defence innovations can apply to any part of defence. Proposals of dual use to both defence and security are also welcomed. And in terms of security, they're looking for innovations in terms of protecting borders, protecting critical national infrastructure, protecting crowded places, reducing the vulnerability of the transport network, including aviation. They're particularly interested in that, strengthening the capabilities of law enforcement agencies and security services, emergency services in the private sector. So we're seeing piles of money being put into this, Brian, including the police and the private sector, anybody that's interested in dealing with defence and security. All on the back of the propaganda that's being developed around the Skripal affair.
And terrorism in general, because we've got more of this occurring locally, with some of the police tweets are back on the subject. Essentially, we should all be very frightened about terrorism every day because it can pop up anywhere at any time. That's the message the government's trying to get across.
Absolutely. Now, the NATO-Russia Council, this is their website, and it's quite an old photograph on there, as you can see. There's a good reason for that. But apparently NATO and Russia are going to hold their first formal talks since the Salisbury attack this coming Thursday under the auspices of the NATO-Russia Council. Now, it was back in 2014. This is the last time this website was updated, in fact, which probably gives some indication about the importance that NATO sees of this conference, the NATO-Russia Council, because it is 2014 since it was last updated, and that was the statement by the NATO foreign minister saying that they were suspending all practical civilian and military cooperation between NATO and Russia. Well, in fact, there have been a number of meetings. This is the 7th one, this one on Thursday, of the NATO-Russia Council in the last 2 years. But whether it actually achieves anything useful remains to be seen. They say that this meeting comes as NATO builds up to its summit in July, which Jens Stoltenberg said would focus on 5 key areas, from deterrence to modernisation and EU relations, and measures to manage ties with Russia. So the language from the NATO side, the fact that they haven't updated the website in so long, I think tells us a pretty significant story about where NATO sees its relations with Russia, and it clearly doesn't have any serious intention to improve the relationship.
No.
Right, in the meantime, let's look at Syria. This came out a couple of days ago. Israel and Russia in secret Syria deal. This is from BICOM. And what they're saying is that Israel and Russia have reached a secret agreement to keep Iranian forces away from Israel's border with Syria. According to media reports, Israel has agreed that Syrian regime soldiers can return to positions in southern Syria near the border with Israel in exchange for Russian guarantees that no Iranian or Hezbollah forces will take up positions in the area. Israel will, however, retain the freedom to act against military targets that are perceived as a threat. Israel Channel 2 News quoted an Israeli diplomatic source who called the agreement a breakthrough and said that Israel has to ensure its own security. So the source of this seems to be Israel diplomats. Well, Syrian Analysis, who, as Vanessa Beeley said at the Media on Trial event, a really good source of information regarding Syria, has done a little of their own analysis of what's actually going on here, and the conclusion is, well, have a look at watch the video. It's entitled on YouTube. It's entitled "Did Russia Agree with Israel to Keep Iran Away from the Syria Border?" And I think the conclusion that they have come to is that this report has come from Israel, that there is probably an agreement between Russia and Syria, but that agreement has been spun. It's not an agreement with Israel. It's an agreement between Russia and Syria that perhaps it's sensible to keep Iranian forces away from the border. And it has been absolutely spun by the Israelis. But do have a look at that report if you get the opportunity. Now, Times today reporting that the United Nations knew of sex for food scandal at top charities. This is the so-called scandal. Would you call it a scandal? I don't think scandal's really the right word, is it?
I think it's a lot more than a scandal because of the scale of it, Mike. But yes, take your point.
Absolutely. So this report saying that more than a dozen international aid organisations are implicated in a sex for food scandal documented by an official United Nations report that has never been published. The Times has obtained a copy of the 84-page document produced by research teams working in refugee camps in West Africa for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And Save the Children in 2001. It identified more than 48 organisations whose workers are alleged to be in sexually exploitative relationships with refugee children. So the United Nations appears to have suppressed this report, according to the Times. They say that many were small local charities, but the list included 15 international organisations, including the UNHCR and the World Food Programme, and the British charities such as Save the Children and Merlin international NGOs including Médecins Sans Frontières, Care International, the International Rescue Committee, the International Federation of the Red Cross Societies, and the Norwegian Refugee Council were also named in the report. So there you go, UN suppressing that, but they're not suppressing that this is International Day of UN Peacekeepers. They seem to be very proud of that, 70-year anniversary. But, you know, as we pointed out, yeah, sorry.
Well, just my initial comment on that image, and I'm seeing it for the first time, Mike, is that you read so much into this, but international peacekeepers, but the image to me is an image of force. I know the helicopter in the background is white, but it's got a slightly sinister tint to it. Then you've got two women who are in military clothes, and you can't see their eyes, so we've got a little bit of the Men in Black here. This is all about power and force in this image. There's nothing about peace in that image to me whatsoever.
Well, indeed, that is a very good point. So we'll just remind everybody of the 21st Century Wire report on this, asking the question, did United Nations peacekeeping troops send Syrian soldiers to certain death in occupied Golan territories in 2012? There's a video clip. It's quite disturbing to watch in this, embedded in this this article, but do watch it because there are many questions that UN peacekeepers have to answer, because it's not just international aid charities that are involved in dubious activity, criminal activity involving sexual activity with children, but UN peacekeepers as well, child abuse, rape, murder of Syrian soldiers on the border with Golan. So United Nations has some questions to answer.
Yeah.
Let's come back to the UK then, and Demos. Well, tomorrow Demos is going to produce a report entitled At Home in One's Past, Nostalgia as a Cultural and Political Force. And what they're saying is that they've been investigating the growing influence of nostalgia as a social and political cultures of three countries, Great Britain, France and Germany. This event they're running an event subsequent to the publication of the report. They say they're going to present the findings of the research, including large suites of focus groups with citizens in each country and interviews with political leaders and journalists. They've also conducted new research into the role that nostalgia played in the EU referendum and the 2017 French and German election campaigns. So, Brian, what is this nostalgia? Are you nostalgic for the history of your culture? Is nostalgia the word to use? What they're implying is that anybody that looks back at the history of British or French or German countries or the culture, that they are in some way they're being nostalgic. It's the past and the history of the country is something that really you don't need to worry about. Just throw it away because it's just something which is, emotional. It's not real.
Well, this is total change agenda, because if you're going to push the change agenda, which Demos wants to, we have to change society to fit the Demos required mould. You've got to get rid of the foundation stone, which is the past, how things used to be, what your identity is, what your culture is. So this is Demos at its dirtiest. And remember, it's the same Demos that felt it needed to go into schools to help train children as to what sort of news they should be watching. Well, let's come back to the BBC on that note. And this was pointed out to me at the end of last week, but we didn't manage to include it at the time. So a BBC article on Harvey Weinstein, charged with rape following New York arrest. If we have a look at some of the reports here, it says, the hashtag #MeToo campaign against sexual harassment and abuse swept through Hollywood last autumn in the wake of accusations against Mr. Weinstein. The movement was prompted by an invitation from actress Alicia Milano on Twitter, asking those who'd been sexually harassed or assaulted to reply "Me Too." She received 500,000 responses in 24 hours. And then it tells you that Me Too began as an idea back in 2006 with the rights activist Taranya Burke, who used it as the name for a group to help those who've been sexually harassed and assaulted. And in January, more than 300 actresses, writers and directors launched the Time's Up project, raising 21 million in just a month. So we're led to believe here, Mike, that this is just a sort of naturally occurring thing, that people who'd been abused have suddenly got angry, they've got together, they've decided to do something. You raise 21 million in no time at all, as you do. No, that's not what's going on. What is going on here is that Demos type agitation, because if we follow it through, we just find this doesn't come back to individuals, ordinary people. This comes back to these shadowy NGO type charity organisations. So the first one that Taranya Burke brings you to is Girls for Agenda Equity. And this is a major operation. I'll leave people to go to the website and have a look through it themselves, just so that you know we're telling the truth here. This is the list of staff, and you can find Taranya Burke listed there as a senior director. But have a look at what other people are involved with. So we've got We've got Joanne Smith, founder and executive director. We've got Peggy Hoopsey, director of institutional giving. Excuse me. And then we've got a Nicole Hamilton, director of Urban Leaders Academy. So this is all part of the network that Demos helps to put together and to encourage. Here's their board names. And the one I got interested in was a lady called Cynthia Steele, who was executive vice president from Empower. We've got a fund manager of Benefits Fund of Wardrobe 764. If you see strange names, you're normally on the trail of these types of strange organisations. So Girls for Gender Equity, also down at the bottom, obviously it's their board. But let's have a look at this lady here. This brings us across into this one, which is Financial Times Outstanding. It says that Outstanding was founded to prove that LGBT plus executives could be visible, safe and successful in business, but our employees don't stop being who they are when they walk out of their office door. So we've now got the media, the BBC, coming back to its own kind. Financial Times here, pushing this role model forward. And it says in this section of the website that they've taken the difficult decision to remove Josh Rivers from the outstanding future leaders list. It says inclusion in the outstanding list is won by those that work consistently to promote inclusive attitudes. While there is no doubt that Josh has dedicated his recent life to doing this, his historical actions are the antithesis of what we stand for. We've taken this decisive action to send a clear message that any kind of hateful, and on it goes. So he's been a naughty boy. Josh has been a naughty boy. He's now excluded from this organisation. So if you don't follow the party line, you get excluded. And who was Suki Sandhu waxing lyrical? Well, this is his Twitter page. Encourage you to go and have a look at it. He, at the moment, is working to help the LGBT movement move into the Muslim community. But he's set himself up to judge other people. If you don't get the standards right, then you're going to be pushed out of this NGO club. And I'm going to say I think this is exceptionally dangerous because it basically says you can't have an individual viewpoint, not approved, you're going to be ostracised, I think is the correct word. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. If you're not a subscriber to UK Column, perhaps you consider taking out a subscription. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.